Hello, welcome to the 30k channel. I'm your host, David Brains, and welcome to this board breakdown video. We've done lots of board build videos in the past, but one of the biggest questions I get on comments on Facebook and YouTube and on the website is, how do I pack the boards down? And there's no easy answer to that. It's just elbow grease. It's a massive pain to pack the boards down, particularly when they're built like this. You know, a lot of people think I've got a really elaborate way of doing it, but I really haven't. The main way is a brush and a dustpan, and that's essentially it. I do have a hoover, which I hoover lots of stuff up with, but it's broken at the moment, so I need to buy a new hoover. You know, I just thought I'd go through this because it gets asked so many times. I have done a couple of these before, but I think they're tagged on to some games which are on the website. So if you're not a subscriber to the website, then you obviously haven't seen those videos. So I've done this one exclusively for YouTube, as that's by far where I get most of the questions asked for this sort of thing. So, you know, you've seen how I build the boards. I love to use the natural rock and stone. The main reason for that is it cuts my costs down. I cannot afford to produce a Realm of Battle board every single game, and then all of the Games Workshop, Forge World, or Unreal Wargame scenery that I use. It's just too expensive. But also as well, I want to make sure that every board I build on the channel is different every single time. We do occasionally use the same board twice, but you know, in my eyes, to count as a completely different board, I don't go, oh, well, this has just moved there, therefore it's a completely new board. All the boards are totally different, which I pride myself in. A lot of channels and a lot of people at home in clubs use mats, you know, the neoprene mats, and they are fantastic for a club or at home or whatever. But for the channel, I think because you're paying some money to watch the channel, I think that you should have something a little bit different and something that's not seen before. It'd be really easy for me to buy like 6 or 7 mats and a load of Games Workshop terrain, which is great terrain. But I just think that just Heresy commands a little bit more realistic feel to it. I feel that sometimes the Games Workshop stuff is a bit too... I've got to be very careful about what I say here. It's got too many skulls on it, and sometimes it's too detailed, whereas I think the Heresy range is a little bit more stripped back. So that's the reason why I've gone for the boards I built. But as I mentioned right at the start, it just saved me a ton of money. And also as well, no one out there on the internet is building boards like this. So I think it's a real unique selling point of the channel, a USP, to turn a phrase. So here we are. This board in particular is built exclusively from Forge World's own Mortalis tiles, a large building from Unreal Wargaming Studios, and then the Games Workshop terrain, which I do love. You know, I do think it is very, very good terrain. The crates in particular are one of my favourite things I've ever made in the entire history of their terrain. So it's sad, but it's true. It's really good. And then a ton of slate, which I brought from a garden centre. And then in this game, we tried to create a winter wonderland. And so we've just got salt, just everyday table salt you can buy at the supermarket. Get like a little tub or a bag for like £1, and you'll only need 2 or 3 bags per table. So you've seen how I build the boards. That's great. But all we're going to do now is we're going to clean it down. And I promise you, it is not exciting or world-breaking or groundbreaking, rather. It's just very, very boring. But it takes probably about an hour, maybe an hour and a half sometimes. And the tools of the trade, as I mentioned earlier, a brush, a garden sieve that you use for sieving soil and rocks and stones for in the garden. They're available with different size grids from a hardware store, or I went to B&Q. If you're in the UK, B&Q is probably one of the biggest stores for that sort of thing. So that, and then just various containers and plastic boxes and receptacles, really. And my aim is to separate the larger rock from the smaller rock that I use to dress the boards. And if you've seen my board builds, I kind of build them in a very specific way. So put the big stuff down first, then some of the little stuff, then the black aggregate or the snow or the sand or whatever I'm using for the world that we're trying to build. And then we'll go back in with some more smaller stones just to create sort of layers of of detail, I guess. So it's really, really simple. Anybody could do it. You don't have to be talented or skilled to do this at all. But the first thing is to get going is we've got to clean all of the salt, all the aggregate off all of the Games Workshop terrain, all the Forge-World stuff, whatever. It's very boring, but that's what we need to do. So literally take a brush, one thing at a time. It doesn't damage the models. I made sure that when the models were painted, they had plenty of varnish on them, so it's quite well protected. And besides, if you chip a little bit more paint here or there, it's probably not going to matter too much, is it? As long as you're not brushing down your Warlord Titan or something, I guess. The salt has stuck to the model a little bit. I think it's because it's been here a week, and where the unit is at the moment, it gets quite cold, and I guess a lot of the salt is stuck on with the water that's kind of condensated in the air, but it comes off. Sometimes what else I do is I just dip them in water, so they've got plenty of varnish on them. I'm not too worried about it. I obviously wouldn't dip my Mechanicum or my Thalax in water, or any of the guest armies in water, but a light brush with a soft brush absolutely does the job. So I'm just going to get on with that. I'll speed this up so you don't have to watch me brush pieces of plastic with salt, and then I'll see you at the next stage. Right, well, that's the boring bit done, I guess. Now, if we were using the black aquarium aggregate or sand, none of that stuff would take nowhere near as much sweeping. I mean, you'd literally just pick it up, give it a shake, and it'd be off. But I think, as I said earlier, because it's got cold in here over the week since I had the board built, the condensation has just settled on the sand, and it's kind of formed a bit of a hard crust over the rocks and all the scenery. So that is a bit of a shame, really. We wouldn't normally have to deal with that. The next step now is to get rid of the really big rocks. Again, these will need just a bit of a brush because of the salt, but that's that one done. And then we'll just continue with the other larger ones. Right, well, it took 2 minutes, I guess. The next thing we need to do now is we've start to separate the larger rocks from the smaller rocks. This, unfortunately, is just as boring as hell, really. There's no two ways about it. I've just got to make sure I dig out these little barrels that I've put in the rocks. But we're just going to scoop them up, give them a bit of a sieve. That's good. And I'm going to dump them in this little box here. And then what I'll do then is I'll then dump them into a much larger box. So this is probably going to take about 10 minutes. I will probably cut out the entire section because it really is not very exciting. But I'll crack on and get going. Right, we've got rid of a lot of the bigger stones towards the centre of the board, so we'll just focus on this bit just to show you the process rather than watch me do the entire board. It's quite boring. Next, you'll need just a standard sieve from a large supermarket. I think it'll cost about £2. A much smaller hand sieve that you'd sieve probably flour through or sugar or whatever. And then a couple of buckets. And then finally, well, we are missing the star of the show. Let me go get it. This one is where the magic happens. This is just a Tupperware tub, and you can see I've just left a gap up this end and then drilled a ton of holes. I think they're probably 5mm holes, and that's what's going to really separate everything. So we just have to do a few various stages, but I've got a dustpan and brush. I'm just going to, I did have a brush somewhere, here we go. Just going to brush up the salt and all the smaller stones, and we're just looking to separate them off. So we'll just start off with the normal sieve, and what that'll do is, that'll pretty much get rid of all of the salt and all of the tiny little pieces in there. So that leaves you with some larger and some smaller stones, and in there is just the salt with all the smaller blacks. Stuff that's just got in there and chips, slate and stuff. We're going to bin that essentially, and then I will just drift it through this last one, and that just gets rid of with the larger black aggregate I've got. Some of it slips into some of the other bits and bobs, so this just allows that to fall through. And again, anything in there I just bin, because what I want these. You can see from the camera there, I just want these smaller stones, and that's what I use to dress around the side of buildings and various other bits and bobs. There are some much larger pieces in here, and I will separate them and just bung them. Yeah, that's probably about right, and just bung them into there really. And then I need a little separate container somewhere to put all of this smaller stone. So I know what you're thinking, a lot of work, a lot of messing around, but in my opinion, it does all work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the entire board now. I'm going to speed it up. This is probably not going to be very interesting, so if I was you, I'd probably just fast forward right to the end and I'll kind of round up. But yeah, I mean, that is essentially it. So it's going to be about an hour, maybe an hour and a half I would normally do of just clearing the boards down. Sometimes it takes a lot quicker, it doesn't take as long. But in this instance, because of the salt and all the separation I've got to do, it just takes a little bit longer. But you know, whatever it takes. Right, well, we're in pretty good shape, to be honest with you. We're done with this larger sieve now, maybe exception of a few little bits. So we're going to dump that. And now we're just on to clear up, really. Again, very, very boring. All we're going to do is sweep up the entire board. I'll probably bang it straight in here. And then we'll separate this lastly. Right, that's done. Very boring. But all we're going to do now is we're going to find our little sieve. It's going to sieve all of that through here. You'll get a bit spilling over, but we'll just sweep it up. Well, no problem. Quite, I don't know, therapeutic maybe, I don't know, it's quite satisfying to know that you can just take those elements of salt, a bit of rock and some terrain and just produce a really great looking board that's quite dynamic in the way that it's played. and you create boards that people have never played on. For me, that's pretty cool. It's really cool. So that has beautifully just separated all of that. I'm going to pull out some of the bigger stuff that has just slipped through. So just this larger sort of size stuff. And it's just left me with the real fine, well, it's not fine, it's just the smaller chunks of rock, which is what we're after. And also the sand has disappeared, the salt has disappeared now, because obviously the stones are knocking together and they're getting rid of that salt. So it saves me a little bit of time. I thought I might have had to soak them in water or just rinse them off with a garden hose or something. But I didn't have to, so that's great. So that's the next lot done. Just pick out much larger stuff that we don't need. That's good. Stick it in my little bowl. I'm going to transfer that back into there. We're going to chuck that salt. It's quite dark and dirty, and it's not very nice. It's got all sorts of... It's horrible. So we've got this in there. So all we're going to do is just sweep up the remainder of this salt that escaped. This is where I'd use the hoover that I had, but it's broken at the moment. I'm not quite sure why. I replaced the filter in it because it was getting quite clogged and that didn't work. The hoover I use is like a construction hoover. It does wet and dry, and it's perfectly suited. It's quite rugged. I wouldn't use your wife's or your girlfriend's or your mother's normal hoover, because they are quite expensive. I think some of the hoovers these days, aren't they? They can be incredibly expensive. So I wouldn't use that on them. It might wreck it. Other than that, I mean, that is board done, really. All I've got to do now is just tidy up a little bit, put these away, give the board a final brush down just to get rid of all of the final remaining bits left, and then it is done, ready to build another board. That is it. I really hope you enjoyed it. As I said, it's one of the biggest questions I get asked on how I pull the boards down after a game. You know, it's not very exciting, as you've just seen, but I do think it's worth it and makes such a different board for you guys to watch the armies play out on. If you've got any more questions, please pop them in the comments below and I'll answer them as best as I can. Don't be rude, that's all I'll ask. If you don't like the way the channel builds the boards, that's absolutely fine. There are tons and tons of other manufacturers out there producing really great products like the mats and different types of terrain. The MDF stuff's really popular. And obviously loads of other channels that do battle reports that don't build the boards in this way. I know sometimes it's been a bit of a polarizing feature of the channel. You don't like it. Some of you think that maybe the sand or the rocks chip models, but they really don't. You know, we're not kids. We don't pick our models up and rub them into the sand or anything. You know, we're adults and they're placed quite nicely on top, and I think visually the whole thing works quite well. Anyway, there is something for everyone out there on the internet, so if this isn't your thing, that's cool. But thank you so much for watching. I really hope you found it interesting. I would love you to go out to your local hardware store, buy a bag of rocks, go to an aquarium shop, buy a bag of aquarium silica or aggregate, whatever you want to call it, put some of your terrain down on it, and I promise you, with a little bit of imagination, it will create a much different and dynamic board for you to play on. A lot of the times I think the undulations and the contours of the board are lost because the camera's quite high. We do occasionally get down with the camera, but because it's kind of filmed at this kind of 30-degree angle, 45-degree angle, you don't always appreciate the lie of the land, I guess, but it is there. Anyway, I'm waffling, I've got to stop. I hope you've enjoyed this. We'll see you in the next game.